Welcome, everybody, to the Digital Nomad Experts podcast by Beach Commute. Today, I'm very excited. I've got a special guest, Wayne Turmel, author of The Long Distance Leader. Wayne, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I am ridiculously well, man. How are you?
That's a hell of an introduction. Amazing.
You
Why are
need
you
to
ridiculously
embrace
well?
the denial. If you just refuse to acknowledge whatever else is going on, it's always good.
Yeah, okay. I'll work on that today. I don't know if that's good for long-term vision, but, today it's going to work just fine.
Today is all we got, brother.
That's a damn good way to put it. So, Wayne, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you give a brief introduction to our audience and maybe a quick snapshot into what it is that we're going to be talking about today?
Sure. My name is Wayne Turmel. I am the subject matter expert for remote and the evolving workplace at the Kevin Eikenberry Group, which means nothing to you, except that I have been specializing in remote and virtual communication for pretty much 20 years. 6 years ago, Kevin and I wrote a book called The Long Distance Leader. It was very successful, translated into 7 languages. We wrote The Long Distance Teammate and The Long Distance Team. And now the second edition of Long Distance Leader is out because you may or may not have noticed the world has changed a little in the last 6 years when it comes to remote work. And so here we are.
You're very ahead of the curve. I remember when I was growing up, I would seldom meet somebody that was working on a computer. And at that time, I was kind of blown away by home computers anyways. And I was like, what are you doing? How are you working? I think it was a guy working at Oracle and he was working from home. And this was just such a rare, unusual concept to me. I thought, holy shit, this is cool. Someday I want to do this. And then pandemic just kind of shot us straight into that.
Some of us have chosen remote work and some have had remote work thrust upon them. It's funny because there has always been remote. What is the William Burroughs line? The future is out there. It's just not evenly distributed, right? And, Genghis Khan ruled half the world and did not have a Zoom account. So it's always been doable and there have always been people doing it. But now as technology moves along, it's made it possible. I mean, I am old enough, he says, getting off his Triceratops. I am old enough that my first major project was rolling out email to my company. So my career is basically the remote work era. And what happened is I got into the business teaching presentation skills, stand at the front of the room, look them in the eye, whatever. And I remember like 18, 20 years ago, somebody said to me, that's great, but I only talk to real people like twice a year. The rest of the time I'm on this new thing called WebEx. And I said, what's a WebEx? And the minute I saw it, I went, this is going to change everything. And nobody is teaching anybody how to use it. It's like, here's your Zoom license, try not to hurt somebody. And so very early on, that became my focus. How do we communicate when this is our tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're not in the same room and we're not on the same continent or in the same time zone, but we need to communicate with each other.
Yeah. So obviously that was moving very, very slowly. And then I'd say maybe 10 years ago or so, you'd see more of it. But the pandemic really just kind of skyrocketed things and like you said, thrust people into it. And I think people adapted for the most part fairly well. But then you've got some holdouts that just don't like it. You've got people that are like, no, this doesn't work. You have to go into an office, get your ass in the seat. I want to see fingers on keyboards kind of thing. Well, that doesn't make sense to me because really the cubicle wasn't invented until I think it was like 62, 63. So the idea of going to do a white collar office job is the only thing that an entire generation of people knew. But in the grand scheme of things, people have always worked where the work is.
Well, I'm going to pull the cranky old man card.
Tell me.
I'm going to play the cranky old man card and tell you that there are two things going on simultaneously. One is that I cut a little bit of slack. I am not a remote work zealot. I am a remote work enthusiast. And by that, I mean, there are jobs where you can't work remotely. If you want to do that job, you just can't do it. the woman who cuts my hair during the pandemic asked me about what I do. And when I told her, she said, well, I'd love to work remotely, but people can't mail me their head.
It's a great way to put it.
Right? There is certain things need to be put on trucks, right? So there is work that cannot be done remotely, and that needs to be accommodated for. The other thing is that we are in the middle of the most seismic change. You talked about the cubicle coming in 1962. The real change was the 30s when we got the 40-hour work, 5 days a week. We began the idea of commuting to an office, whereas before that was never a thing, right? We were primarily a rural economy. We became an urban economy, and everything changed. We are now in the middle of one of those changes. And as with all change, there are people who are ahead of the curve. There are people who are kind of finding themselves in the middle of it. And then there are people who are never going to get with the program, and sucks to be them. Where we are, it's funny. You mentioned, the 10 years before the pandemic. That's a pretty good time frame to look at it. Remote work, or telecommuting, as it was called back in the dark ages, was growing at about 25 to 30% a year every year. And we, Long Distance Leader came out in 2018, and we were ahead of the curve by about a minute and a half because COVID came and pushed everybody across the Rubicon. And every change happens like that. It builds up and builds up and builds up. And then there's this 100th monkey moment where suddenly everybody's doing it. Now we have to figure it out. And the other thing, maybe because I'm a grumpy old man, I kind of have sympathy for the grumpy old men who didn't get with the program right away, because in their defense, not that they need my defending, but in their defense, that's how they succeeded. They didn't have a reference. The people who had worked remotely the least prior to COVID was senior leadership. And so, I became successful by being in the office, by networking, by FaceTime, by doing all that. And I want my people to be successful. And therefore, this is how it's done.
So I've got a question for you in looking at how it's done and these mindsets. So there's from what I've seen, still there's a mindset of I'm going to manage to results, manage to productivity, and I'm going to manage to attendance. So how do we come to this place where we
two of those things are a problem. The third one is the answer. Okay. The problem is that we aren't managing to results. If we were managing to results, managing to results is your job is to give me a forecast, run the numbers and give me a forecast, and I need it in my inbox by 8 a.m. Friday, and I need it to a certain standard. That's managing to results. Managing to attendance is I want you at your keyboard at 9 o'clock and you don't leave until 5, and I want report on my desk.
Yeah.
Right? So we have managed by activity rather than results for a very long time. And if you want proof of that, you ask people, why do you want people coming into the office? And they say, well, we want to make sure that they're working, and I can look out at the cube farm and I can see that they're working. And my answer is, can you really? Because I don't know about you, I know plenty of people who show up on time and don't leave until it's time and don't do a darn thing all day long.
I think I read some statistic, some study, who knows, studies, that people are actually productive about 2 hours and 45 minutes per day. Have you heard that before?
Yeah. You can get all geeky and go, what do we mean by productive? And what? But I'll give
we can get geeky if we want.
But there are things that we do know, right? The human brain can only focus, high attention focus, for 40 minutes at a time.
Yeah. That's why we have those timers. That's why we have the productivity sprints, all that stuff.
And, Csikszentmihalyi talked all about flow and all those things. Well, as we start to look at when does remote work make sense, when does it make sense to be in the office, what kind of work are we expecting people to do, and when are we expecting them to do it? So if my job is to put stuff in a computer all day, and I fight traffic and I hang my coat over the door and I sit on my keyboard and I pound it for 8 hours and then I get up and I leave, I probably don't need to be in the office to do that particular job. And one of the things about the pandemic was we found out there was and this is a highly technical term, metric butt ton of jobs that could be done remotely that nobody ever thought about, or that we didn't think could be successfully done that way. And lo and behold, they can. Right? It was this weird, COVID was this weird test lab for a lot of this stuff. And some of our assumptions turned out not to be true, and other assumptions turned out to be exactly right. And mostly senior leaders were wrong. That's what we learned.
But they're walking some of this back. In the pandemic, 2020, 2021, nothing but reports on highest profit, productivity is through the roof. You're all doing a great job. And now all of a sudden we're reading the opposite. You need to come back in because you're not productive.
There's a bunch of stuff going on here. Okay. Yeah. And let's be brutally honest. Apparently, candid honesty is the tone today. Some of it is sunk cost bias. We have an office. I walk in there, I am paying a buttload of money for office space and nobody's in it. And that makes me crazy. Some of it is, I go to the office every day. This is how I get stuff done. And there's nobody there. Some of it is legitimately work is social. And there are a lot of people. I spoke this morning to a guy in Hong Kong. Well, the home office is not a thing in Hong Kong. Like, what is this spare bedroom you're talking about? It's not a thing. Like, I have to go to the office in order to get something done.
I literally do not have space for this.
Yeah. And so, there's a whole lot of white privilege involved in the ability to work remotely. Let's be honest about that. But there's all these things, like I said earlier, Jamie Dimon caught a lot of flack about a year ago, the guy at Citibank who said, if you want to work from home, that's fine, but you've taken yourself off the career track and don't expect to get promoted. And clearly you are not really interested in a career if you do that. And there was all the crying and moaning that you would expect with that. And there was a pretty healthy amount of turnover. If you are prepared for that kind of turnover, if you are prepared to limit how many people apply to work for you, that's a choice.
You're free to do so.
You're free to do so. It is not my place to tell you your business model. But even now, as we move to hybrid work, which is not hybrid work for the most part, it's a hostage negotiation. But as we move to hybrid, perhaps I need to explain that in a minute.
Yeah, I'm going to need you to unpack that.
But as we move to hybrid work, there is a disconnect between what we say we want and what's really happening, right? We want to hire the absolute best world-class people, but what you're really saying is we need to hire the absolute best world-class people who live within 20 miles of the office. The hostage negotiation. Here's what I mean by that. Hybrid work is a legitimate strategy, but most people don't look at it strategically. The hostage negotiation comes, how much can I make them come back to the office before they quit? How much can I whine about going into the office before they fire me? We settle on 3 days a week. You can work from home 2 days. Nobody's 100% happy, but it works and we're getting on with our lives. But then when you talk to people who work in these environments, for some it works fine. For others, it's, I can't get any work done when I'm in the office because I'm trying to get my work done and there's people stopping by my cube and so wants to talk and we call a huddle because we're trying to solve a problem and there's cake in the break room because it's Alice's birthday and I can't get any work done. And then we go home and I can't get any work done because I'm on Zoom calls from morning till night. Well, the problem is not where you're working. The problem is what work gets done where. And where a hybrid work becomes strategic is when you start making decisions about when we are physically together, what are the things that should be happening. That's when we should have our meetings. That's when we should have our one-on-ones with our employees. That's when we should be having the team celebrations and doing all that stuff. When people are working from home and they need to focus and they need that heads down work, does it matter that they are online the same time as everybody else?
So, give me some examples of both types of work. Work that should happen potentially in person and work that should happen async.
Okay, so let's assume that you're in one of these couple days a week in the office, couple days not. If your job is checking off tasks, right, making X number of phone calls, doing X, X, and Y, you're right. You're not getting stuff done when you're in the office. That is absolutely true. You know what is happening is you're getting together, and that's when you're holding your huddle. That's when you're saying, you know what, we've got this problem with the Jackson account. Let's get a couple of people together and talk about how to solve this. Let's get on the whiteboard. Let's do that. Let's bring pizza in for the team and just talk about what everybody's working on. That's work. That's an important part of work for a lot of teams. Unless your job is totally tasks, which it's usually not, but unless your job is completely individual tasks, that's when that work should be happening. And there's no schedule. It's nothing to say 3 days a week is it, right? There are branches of the federal government that say you need to be in the office 2 days every pay period. And I know somebody who is commuting from Florida to Washington, D.C., because her son lives in Washington, D.C., and she can fly up cheap, she can visit her kid, and she can go into the office a couple of days, and the rest of the time she works from the Gulf Coast of Florida. She's meeting the contractual obligations. She's very senior in her job. And a lot of this depends on a bunch of stuff. I mean, I talked earlier about white privilege. I wasn't just being politically correct. It depends where you are in your career. What we are finding, interestingly, is young people straight out of college, new hires, want more social contact with their peers. They want to go in the office because they don't know anything. Right? They don't know what it is to be a professional. They don't know anything about their industry. They don't know. And by the way, they just left college, so their social networks have just been blown up. They might be in a city where they don't know anybody, right? There are legit reasons to congregate when it's early in your career. If I'm 15 years into my career and I'm doing my job and I don't want to be CEO someday, I want to do my job and I know how to do my job and I've proven that I can do it, I don't need to be in the office every day unless there's a compelling reason. So what we're finding is managers and people who have been in their jobs a really long time are the ones who are seeking the flexibility, who want to work remotely.
Kind of the area that I lean into, which is easy to say from my position because I saw both sides of the coin. I was trained and I did learn in an office environment. I benefited from that. And then I got to a point where it no longer benefited to me and it just became a nuisance.
Right.
Yeah, I can see somebody coming fresh out of college, 22, and the company says, read through all these training docs, watch all of these videos on how to be trained, and that's it. You're off.
Well,
Good
during
luck.
COVID, we had a really interesting thing because at the beginning of COVID, and everybody, the diaspora happened and everybody got sent out, and the company was like, okay, this is going to be just like being in the office, except we're on webcam. We log on at a certain time, we do certain things, and that worked great, except by the end of the period, you had 2 years of kids and new hires who had been hired who didn't know what it meant to work in an office. They'd never worked in an office. And what does it mean to be professional? How do you address people higher than you on the food chain? You do not send a poop emoji to the VP. There are things that you pick up by osmosis in physical proximity that you don't pick up otherwise. This thin veneer of civilization is actually a very thin veneer of civilization. I asked a client, how's return to office going? And she says, it's a nightmare. And I said, what do you mean it's a nightmare? She says, they've gone feral. They don't know how to dress professionally. They play loud music at their desks. They don't talk to each other politely. They all this socialization, all this normalization that we learned since the 1930s about what does it mean to go to work and what do you do when somebody pays you, the guardrails are off. And it's not that those things aren't important, and it's not that professionalism isn't serious and can advance or hurt your career, but what does it mean? Right? If you're working remotely, does it matter that you put on a shirt with buttons? I will tell you that if the only time my boss's boss sees me is when I'm wearing my AC/DC t-shirt and my cat is walking across the keyboard, that's not going to have a great impact on my career chances.
No, that's a good point. I got into a LinkedIn comments section, which is a terrible place to be, because all of this stuff on Amazon was coming out, and we should maybe touch on that briefly.
Yeah.
And this guy disagreed with me. He said that people want to work remote because they don't like humans, and they're going to stunt their growth, and they're not going to be able to be properly socialized. And on one hand, like, from the things that you're saying and the things that I've seen, he might be right. There might be some social stunting. There might be some issues with that. But on the other hand, it's not your job to police that. It's not really our problem. As corporations, shouldn't we just be looking at productivity and not worrying about that? I don't know. Where do we come in on that?
It's interesting because, again, let's take the last 100 years. 8 hours a day we are at work. 8 hours a day we sleep. That leaves us 8 hours a day to live our lives. And that's the way it's been for 100 years. In the 80s and 90s, a third of long-term relationships began in the workplace. HR departments are freaking out and heads exploding as I say that. But think about it. It's a third of your life is spent in the workplace. And I don't mean you're necessarily sleeping with your coworkers, although Lord knows, talk to your parents, there was plenty of that. But what I mean is, somebody had a sister. Everybody at work went out for a beer afterwards, and I met somebody. I met a customer. I met whatever.
Start making ties.
You start making ties. Human beings do that, right? And there was a very restricted period of time. And up until very recently, 60% of our social interaction for the week took place during working hours. That's when we met the most people, talked to the most people, saw the most people, and that's how it worked. So when they say we're socialized to do that, they're not wrong. That's the environment in which we were raised. Now, cut to 30% of long-term relationships begin online. They begin through apps. They begin through social media. You finally meet. You do it.
Are you talking about dating or just...
Yeah, I'm talking about long-term social relationships.
Okay.
Well, a third of, and it used to be you did that by marriages, but that's no longer a valid thing. So long-term social relationships, we'll use that word. But they now begin online because we've kind of learned how to do that. And we learned how to screen people, and we've learned how to say, oh, this person is interesting and I don't want anything to do with this person. We can learn anything, right? Drop anybody into an environment and eventually they'll figure it out. But it was easier when there were rules. One thing about the 8-hour day was your time was your own, whatever. You finally got to the office and your job was to give your best for 8 hours. And let's not kid ourselves. There is a responsibility from the employee to the employer, as well as the other way around. And that's something that gets lost in the remote work conversation, because the company says, we want you to come back because of this. And they give you all the company's reasons. And the other people say, well, we want to work from home because we want to see our kids. The commute is costing me $5,000 a year that I would rather put in my pocket, whatever. Well, the employer doesn't care about your work-life balance except as it impacts your work. And if you're making it clear that you don't care about the company's needs, they're not going to give a rat's butt about you. Something that we've been talking about a lot, which is the Spider-Man paradox. Again, perhaps I should explain. The Spider-Man paradox, if you know your geekdom, is with great power comes great responsibility. Well, to have the flexibility to work from home, to have the flexibility to choose the hours in which you work and the way in which you work and the projects that you work on is great power. But you still have a responsibility to the person who is paying you. Honest day's work for an honest day's wage has not changed. So if your idea of working from home is, I'm going to log on to meetings, but I'm going to put it on mute and I'm going to go multitask, or I'm only going to check in when I have to, and, if my boss doesn't directly ask me a question, I'm not stepping in. Well, that might work for a while. Two things that we know. Number one is that's not a career move. Not everybody wants a career. That's fair. But the second thing is that human beings like purpose. We actually like doing something constructive. We like other people for the most part. Even introverts need some degree of human interaction. And if you are engaged, your work is not a burden and you do better work and the company gets better value for their investment in you. And the company knows that people who give a hoot do better work than people who don't. And by the way, you don't have to micromanage them and you don't have to spend all this time monitoring them. And so we are in the middle of this thing where you can't entirely blame employees because the guardrails have always been there and now the guardrails are off. And people respond in different ways. During the pandemic, there was a whole, there were tons of horror stories about so-and-so actually had another job while they were supposed to be working for me remotely. And there's always horror stories, right? You can't manage to the exception. But it was interesting because the big concern was people won't work unless we are on top of them and we can see what they're doing. But when we asked people, what are you doing with this extra 2 hours a day that you're getting by not commuting? The number one answer was working. At the beginning of the pandemic, the problem wasn't that people were working, it's that they couldn't turn it off. They had their phones that were constantly beeping and going off. And if my boss sends me an email at 10 o'clock at night, I'm going to get fired if I don't respond right away. Well, no, you won't. Bosses were horrified to find out that people were believing that. The good ones were horrified to find out because they said, I sent this email because I thought about it and I sent it while I was thinking about it. I did not expect you to respond to me within 20 minutes, but there were no rules. There were no norms. Nobody had ever talked about this stuff.
Yeah, it's a really good point. When I first went remote, I think it was around 2017 or so. And it was a mess. It is I know. It's so true. I mean, I was, and that actually translated to everything in my life. I had no idea how to do it. There were no guardrails. It was just figure it out. And I figured it out very poorly. This is not a one size fits all. You just slip right in and you can figure it out on your own. I mean, my sleep schedule got screwed up. My socialization got screwed up. I didn't know how to be productive at different times of the hour of the day. I didn't know how to set up a workspace. This was a learned process over, 3 or 4 years. And I did a really poor job of it. And it took me a while to learn how to do this in a way that I was effective, in a way that was good for me personally and professionally. So it was a skill just like my skills I learned at work.
I'll give you a really simple example. I have always had a distributed team. My first big boy grown-up management job was 1996, God help me. And I had some people in the office and people scattered all over the West Coast. So I've always had a distributed team. I started working from home part-time a couple of years after that, and full-time by 2007 or so. And again, there were no rules for this stuff. Well, when I started working from home full-time, I did what a lot of people do, which is, oh my God, this is great. I can be in my jammies till 11 o'clock. Because there were a lot less webcams back then. I can work whenever I want. And what I found was that I was working way too many hours, and I wasn't always on my game. And I figured out the reason. I needed a defined start and a defined end to my day. The way I define that, this is Wayne. I get up, I check my email, I do whatever. Most of the people are on the West Coast, so my day starts at 7 o'clock, let's say. I kind of check for any burning fires. I have breakfast, I shower, I put on big boy clothes, I make my bed, I sit at my desk. My day has begun. I work the prescribed amount of time, whatever that is. I get up, I close my computer, my day is over. There was a structure that Wayne needed because he has the attention span of an Irish setter and the maturity of a 10-year-old boy. Just that little bit of structure. Have a shower, put on grown-up clothes, right? Start your day with some sort of routine changed forever the way I work. Doesn't mean there aren't days when, I'm doing something and I shower later, or I'm in my, t-shirt and shorts all day. Doesn't mean that doesn't happen. But for the most part, I had to learn what worked for me, what made me successful, what made me focused, what distracted me.
That's so important. And specifically the separating work and personal, because it's in the same physical space, where in the past you had a physical distance between you and your work, and it's easier to mentally turn off with a physical distance. Now you can connect just by opening your laptop on your bed, and that was really unhealthy. I had the same thing.
It's incredibly unhealthy.
I need to have 100% availability. I need to be on all the time, and in my board time, or even if I'm anxious, just open up the laptop and start doing some work. That's a really, really bad coping mechanism that it takes a while to learn how to turn off. How do I create specific hours and feel like I need to do more, but tell my brain override this and use some personal time now, because you're going to burn out and your next 2 days are going to be shit.
Well, it's funny. You made assumptions. You made a couple of assumptions in what you've said. And one of them is that it's binary. Either you're in the office or you're working from home. Well, remote work, Mr. Beach Remote Commute guy, you know that remote simply means you're not in the office with everybody else. There is a reason third spaces exist, whether that's a coffee shop, whether that's an actual co-working space like a Regis or a WeSpace or something like that. In the middle of my remote work and all of that, 4 years ago, my bride retired. For 10 years, I had the house to myself from morning till night. It was quiet. It was me and the dog. I could work uninterrupted. Now suddenly 10 o'clock every morning at full volume, The View is playing downstairs, and I'm trying to work while Whoopi and Joy are yelling at each other. I had to reschedule my day. I had to think about how this works. I had to set rules with my loved one about, hey, this is not okay. We need to do this. And there are times when I have said, I'm taking my computer and I'm going somewhere else to get this work done. And again, who teaches us that? Because not only do we not know that it's okay, not only do we think it's just us and nobody else, everybody's different. I can share with you my experience. I can share with you, and we do. I mean, Long Distance Leader is in its second edition, 40,000 copies sold, translated into 7 languages. I can give you guidelines and best practices, but your company is different than mine. You work cutting hair. Your remote work schedule, the way that you organize your life, is going to be very different than somebody else. And we're in this upheaval where everything is changing, and yet some things remain the same. And how do we navigate that? And that's why people like me exist. Because my job is to look at the landscape and capture best practice and say, hey, here's what we're finding. Here's what the data shows. It's not just you, it's everybody is going crazy. And that stuff is helpful. It serves a purpose. I hope so. That's why I'm here, right? Is to help people navigate that.
When you think about productivity, just kind of how the human brain is productive or not productive, look at the standard hours, the 9 to 5, 8 to 4, whatever people are working. And I've yet to meet somebody that is optimized during those hours, productive during like this arbitrary set of hours. And I've had employees say, I'm a night person. Do you care if I work from like 7 to midnight? And my answer has always been, just get your job done and be available for meetings. I really don't care. But that only worked in a remote environment. You can't do that in an office. You can't say,
Right.
I need to go take an hour and a half walk because my brain is screwed and I need to recharge.
Well, and it's expensive to have the lights on 24/7. And it's
The heat,
I mean,
lights,
there are reasons for this, right? Yeah, what does it mean to be productive? And we've always had this problem. Schools are discovering this. For all kinds of reasons, the school day has changed, mainly because it gets to be 115 degrees in Las Vegas in a year-round school system. So they start school at 7:30 in the morning. Do you remember being 13 years old? There is not a worse time to ask somebody to sit straight, shut up, and pay attention than a 13-year-old at 7:30 in the morning, right?
impossible.
The system says we need school hours from this to this. It's totally wrong for the way kids' brains work. I am and always have been a morning person. I'm out of bed at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. Asking me to start my day at 6:30 or 7 o'clock. First of all, Kevin doesn't ask me to start my day. But that's when I do it because my brain's sharp and functional. And oh, by the way, 7 o'clock here is 10 o'clock in Indianapolis. So we can have a few hours where I overlap with my peers and my customers for synchronous work. And then the rest of the time, I'm free to do whatever I need to do whenever I need to do it. And if I need to teach a class because of time zones, I need to teach a class at 5 in the morning because it's whatever time it is in Hong Kong. I've had to be showered and functional at 5 in the morning more than I'd like to count. But then he's not worried about when I clock off. But he's an enlightened human. It's a small company. It's for the last 10 years, it's been a dispersed work environment with people all over the place. And we serve clients all over the world. So really, really structured work times doesn't make sense for us.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we have to do a lot of async tools. And thank God we've got so many useful ones now.
It's never been easier. But, as we say in the book, the biggest challenge to lead remotely, to lead a team remotely, is choosing the right tools for the right job. And remote work allows bad managers to be really bad. My favorite terrible example is my wife was once fired by instant messenger.
You're kidding me.
Oh, no, I am serious as a heart attack. Now, see, your response is what most sentient human beings would say, which is, oh my gosh, that's awful. That's the wrong tool for the job. But was it? She was fired at the end of the interaction. Check. I didn't have to deal with tears and craziness. Check. I don't care if she's mad because she's never working for me again anyway. Check. Now, that says everything about the culture of that company, by the way.
Yeah.
If that's the way the manager thinks, probably not somewhere you want to work long term, right? And that's clearly an awful example. But now I'll give you a different one. It's 4 o'clock on Thursday. I'm just about done my day, and I need to give you some feedback. But God, you know what you're like. You know what? I'm going to send you an email and I'll deal with it tomorrow. Is that the ideal way to handle that situation? Maybe not, but God, it's tempting. And God, it's easy. And might play to my conflict avoidant personality.
Yeah.
But it's not the right thing to do. And so one of the things we have in our book, and this is maybe the most important thing you can share with your team. If you manage a remote, we have something, it's not even our model. It's Bettina Buchel's model from 2000. But there is a balance of richness and scope. If you think about richness, you and I having a cup of coffee one-on-one over a table is the richest possible form of communication. It's synchronous. We're getting visual cues, nonverbals. It's real time. You can ask clarifying questions. I can see the look on your face if I say something stupid and correct myself. Incredibly rich. On the other side of the scale is email. Not everything needs to be one-on-one, right? I don't need to go to every person in the company and say, it's Dave's birthday, there's cake in the break, right? An email, a chat message will solve that problem. Email, 100 people can get the exact same information at the exact same time anywhere in the world at the speed of light. That's great. If you've ever spent 3 days apologizing for an email it took 30 seconds to write, that it's not a perfect communication method.
You just
It
have to
lacks
assume people are
context,
going to
it
read
lacks richness.
email.
I have no idea if you've read it. The big thing, I just survived a meeting that could have been an email, and I asked leaders, why did you have the meeting then? And they said, because nobody read the damn email. This conversation about richness versus scope. When do we meet in person? When will a webcam do the job? When can we talk without having the webcam on? When do I send an email? When do I send a chat message? What's the expected return time, right? Napoleon said, if you want to avoid war, you avoid the 1,000 little pinpricks that lead to war. Well, think of all the communication challenges that we do to each other that cause way more tension than there needs to be. Think about this. How many people use their status update properly on Teams or Slack?
Properly? Very small percentage.
Right. Basically, there are 3 buttons. Green, in a meeting, do not, I'm not here.
Red.
Those are your 3 options. Well, first of all, if I'm at work and I decide, I'm going to take my lunch break right now, I go downstairs and have a sandwich, that thing still says to the rest of the world, I'm available. So now I'm sending you messages and you're not answering me, you antisocial weasel, right? Simple things like, when do you use your status updates? Don't just rely on those 3 dots. Every tool has an explanation bar where you can say, I'm in the office, but I'm working on something. I'm available after 2:00. All of a sudden, I'm no longer sitting there drumming my fingers, waiting for an answer that isn't coming.
Yeah, it's still in this place because it's so new for so many people. Probably not you. You've got it pretty well dialed in at this point, using the various asynchronous devices, optimizing your time, all that kind of stuff.
But I don't. Because I am the tail end of a boomer, as much as it kills me to admit that. And I have a 31-year-old daughter who seems to not understand that telephones also transmit voice.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So her preferred method is text. My preferred method is chat, but I have learned I can't just call her. I send her a text that says, can I call you at 10:00? And she'll say yes or no, and then I call her. If she really, really wants to do something, she needs to know that she can't text me in the middle of the night and not have me ask questions. And this happens all the time. Some people prefer email. Some people prefer chat. Some people actually like, God forbid, to talk to people. Unless there is agreement on, under these circumstances, these are the tools our team is going to use. And these are the rules, right? You can send an email, but understand they have up to 24 hours to respond to that email. If you send an email and sit there drumming your fingers waiting for an answer, you're using it wrong. But how many teams, let alone organizations, how many teams have had that conversation?
None that I've seen. It's just figure it out. I mean,
and that's it. Anytime we're left to figure it out, there are people who will figure it out. I mean, one of the conceits of our book, and it's both the harshest criticism and the nicest thing people say about our book, it's the same thing. So, well, it's mostly just leadership 101. And we're like, yes, because most of this is leadership 101. The first rule in our book is think leadership first, location second. If you're a good leader and you understand the purpose of connecting and the need for feedback, you've probably found a way through brute force to make this work. If you're the kind of leader who doesn't do that, man, it's easy to manage remotely. You never have to talk to people. You can just send an email, right?
Cruise control.
So we're all figuring this out as we go. The best you can hope for, and this is why we're here, is to figure out you're not alone and other people have done this and here's what they're doing that works.
Ultimately, long term, do you envision this being a positive evolution of work for people and companies, negative or just neutral?
I think, whenever I complained as a young man, my father always used to say, yeah, that's why they call it work, kid.
Sounds
Earning a
familiar.
living is always going to kind of suck. You're going to be asked to do things you don't want to do. You're going to be doing things that you don't think are the right thing to do. You're going to be asked to do things where you're thinking, I ain't getting paid enough to do this. That is never going to change. Og the caveman, probably as he was dragging his prey back to the cave, said, why am I doing this? I'm only going to get the same amount as everybody else. Work sucks. We're all figuring it out. I think that it's a net positive in that it will give people opportunities that they've never had before. If you want to talk really big picture, I think that it is going to open up opportunity. If I live in the middle of small town South Dakota, my job options are pretty limited. Unless somebody says there's a really talented kid in small town South Dakota and we're going to hire him and give him this opportunity. That's a positive. A third of the population of Chicago exists to serve people who come into Chicago every day on business. Office cleaners, restaurants, Uber drivers, whatever. If people stop coming into downtown Chicago from the suburbs, what happens to that mostly underserved, mostly minority, mostly poor population?
I've seen it happen to San Francisco.
It's happening in San Francisco. It's already, again, the future is not widely distributed, right? We've already kind of seen what this looks like. We don't know what the changes are going to be. We don't know how all of this is going to shake out. But here's the thing that gives me, well, there's two things that give me hope. One is I'm not going to be around that much longer to have to deal with it. It's somebody else's problem. But the big thing is that we've never known what's going to happen, right? Every generation believes that the generation that came after them is useless and has no respect and has no work ethic. And that's been going on since the dawn of time.
Yeah.
That never changes. My 31-year-old may not know what it is to work in a traditional office and doesn't have much respect for that, but she doesn't lack hustle. You can't teach hustle. So is it a positive? Is it a negative? It just is. And I don't mean to sound zen about that.
No, it's a good answer.
But whatever the circumstances are that you find yourself, you have the option of go kicking and screaming through it, which is no fun, not very productive, and you don't usually get ahead of anything. Just kind of float or get proactive and figure out where is this headed and how do I maximize my ability to be in the right place at the right time.
So that's my last question for you. Where is this headed? We had a big surge. It was almost all remote work, a big pullback recently. We don't know, obviously, but in your best guess, which trajectory are we looking at? Flat, increase, decrease?
I think it will settle on some percentage. I mean, it's funny. We said that during the pandemic, everybody worked from home. That is literally not true. About a third of the workplace was able to work from home. It just happened to be the same third of the workplace that we and our friends in our social circle kind of existed in. I think there will certainly be more flexibility. I think there will always be a need for central places. I think there will always be not only a preference, but a need for the ability to work anywhere at any time, right? Again, if you want the absolute best people and they don't live within 20 minutes of your office, you're going to have to find a way to accommodate this, right? As a business strategy, there is an advantage to this. And as we figure out what hybrid work truly looks like, that'll give us yet another way to do this. So I think that it's always going to morph. I think it's going to settle in some percentage of in-place versus remote, and circumstances are going to dictate what those look like, but it's never going away. The genie is not going back in the bottle. As a manager, I'm going to give you a little inside baseball that you don't care about, but I'm going to tell you anyway. When Kevin and I started this part of our company, when we were writing The Long Distance Leader, there was something called the Remote Leadership Institute. And the reason that existed was people were going, oh my God, we don't know how to do remote. The Remote Leadership Institute technically doesn't exist anymore. It's been folded into the Kevin Eikenberry group because every manager now, every manager above first line supervisor is likely to have somebody on their team who doesn't work where they do when they do. It's just going to be part of the air we breathe. It's just going to be part of leading a company, leading an organization, leading a team, leading people. It's just going to become the norm. And we can fight it and whine about it, or we can figure out how to do it right. And I like to think we're helping people figure out how to do it right.
It's a great answer. Wayne, thank you so much for joining me today. I could do like 20 of these sessions with you. This has been awesome. I love the
I'm
topic.
so glad.
I love your insights.
Sometimes it's like somebody pulls the string in my back and just off I go. So I hope you and your listeners have found this helpful, man.
That's what we signed up for. Thank you so much. Where would you like to send the listeners to?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the second edition of The Long Distance Leader is out now. The Long Distance Leader, Revised Rules for Remarkable Remote and Hybrid Leadership. It's a book. Where do you buy your books? Find it there. You can find me on LinkedIn, Wayne Turmel Connect. I'm a sucker for a good LinkedIn connection. And to find out about our company and what we do, go to kevineikenberry.com.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining this week, and we will see you again next week.